As we begin today, I'd like to share that eQuo is founded on core principles of unity and diversity, equality, inclusion, and mutual respect, which we believe are important cultural values toward establishing an equal spirit of community. So with this in mind, I'd like to thank Rye Barberstock, Wolf Clan member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, for being my guide and friend who has helped me to better understand First Nations and our relationships with one another. I truly believe that understanding comes from sharing knowledge. And Rye taught me that a land acknowledgement is an opportunity to express our gratitude, but it's also an acknowledgement of our positionality and identity, as well as our shared treaty obligations to honor, respect, and care for the land, water, natural resources, peoples, and the ecosystem which sustains us all. This is at the very heart of eQuo. Our community believes that we're all interconnected in one way, shape, or form. We must find sustainable means to take care of each other as well as our planet by working together. As I learn and continue to grow, I find that I want to do more than acknowledge our gratitude to be able to work, live, and play in the lands and waters of Southern Ontario, the land known as the dish with one spoon. I want to acknowledge more in the form of the many wampum belts that were made and the good intentions behind them on these shared lands. Wampum belts were used to mark agreements and records between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And I don't want to do a disservice to the Indigenous peoples and their nation-to-nation relationships and the depth behind them. So I encourage you all to explore and discover their significant meanings. And we'll be having a webinar specifically discussing trade and procurement from an Indigenous perspective in the fall, and I hope you all attend. I've been privileged to have spent 2 weekends speaking with Rye and his partner Shira, listening and learning from Indigenous historical and contemporary worldviews. So I'd like to acknowledge the friendship belt, which represents a long existing friendship between people, and by extension, their relationship with the non-human world. The friendship wampum belt represents a symbol of shared peace, unity, and prosperity. These principles shape the foundation of wampum diplomacy. The wampum belts are made of many rows of wampum beads, and the strings crafted by the visionaries of their time, the treaty makers, who bind these belts with great care, which represented mutual respect and peace for people and place. I would also like to acknowledge the dish with one spoon wampum belt covenant. This was a treaty that bound the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee to share common lands and protect and preserve resources of the land for future generations. Subsequent Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, also known as North America, including Europeans and newcomers, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I'm acknowledging these two distinct wampum belt treaties so that we can come together in friendship, but also in collaboration with one another to find meaningful ways to collaborate, work together, grow together, and succeed as a collected community sharing mutual respect for one another, and who are willing to work side by side to create a prosperous and peaceful future for this generation and generations to come. These treaties and the foundational ideas behind them are also important for today's session. Crowdfunding is a different form of funding and one based on community and friendship. It provides an opportunity to allow the community to participate and benefit in their shared support of one another. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's session, Crowdfunding 101. This is becoming an incredibly more attractive option for small business owners looking for alternative funding. Why? There are many reasons. 80% of small businesses are turned down by banks when they look for funding. VCs and angels haven't shown an interest in small business, and most founders don't have the networks to access them, even if they did. Recent changes to crowdfunding rules in Canada have created new opportunities for founders to access new investments, and they allow this new group of retail and accredited investors to equally have access to incredible small businesses. So we're going to discuss crowdfunding with an incredible panel today, so you can understand what's involved and to start a crowdfunding campaign or participate in one as an investor. I'd like to start by introducing Trieste Reading. Trieste is the Director of Campaign Strategy for Frontfundr, one of the first online investment platforms for crowdfunding in Canada, and a partner with eQuo. Alexander Mersink is the managing director for Equivesto, one of the most recent crowdfunding platforms, and they're also a partner with eQuo. Plus, we have Trung Pham, founder of Rice, a startup that motorizes blinds and shades via IoT devices, and someone who's actively used crowdfunding for his own business. And we have Jennifer Crawley, CMO for eQuo, who will share an overview of crowdfunding and add some light to our own crowdfunding campaign in the past year, as well as myself. eQuo is excited to present this webinar today. We've been building the first matchmaking platform to connect small businesses with funding, investors, capital, and customers. But having access to capital and understanding capital and how to benefit from it, they're not the same thing. So I'd like to welcome our audience and thank our guests for their participation. And I hope that everyone has a much better understanding of crowdfunding and can use that understanding to help them grow and create a broader community where we can provide more support for everyone. So I'm going to start right out of the gate with Jen, and would love to have you give an overview, a presentation, because as of September of last year, there have been some pretty significant changes. So I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer.
Awesome. Thank you, Barry. Let me just share my screen here with you. Are we good? Everybody can see?
We're good, Jen.
All right. So good afternoon. Thank you. Good. So good afternoon, everyone. As Barry mentioned, I'm Jennifer Crowley, CMO and partnership lead here at eQuo. And I'm going to open up today's discussion with a brief overview of what founders need to understand about the overall process of starting a crowdfunding campaign. So you've got a great idea and you think that you can turn it into a business. Let's explore and see if crowdfunding is right for you. Before we get there, we're going to take a quick peek at how and when various types of funding are typically raised. Of course, there's always outliers, but let's look at the most common path for founders today. So you have an idea and you haven't fleshed it out yet. You're considered pre-seed, and typically you will rely on friends and family to get you to a seed round from a funding perspective. What we're talking about today is equity crowdfunding. And really to get involved in that holistically, you need to have an MVP or a minimum viable product or even a prototype. But you're still looking for funds to perfect it before you launch it. Crowdfunding is a great option, and we will get back to that. From an angel and venture capitalist perspective, you really look at them once your product has hit the market and you start to make money. And depending on your situation, that angel investor or venture capitalist can help you to scale and grow. And then if you're in a business that's rocking and you're looking for more than, say, $2 million in funding to grow further, you can then launch an IPO and become a publicly traded company. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're talking crowdfunding today. So what exactly is it? Crowdfunding refers to raising money from the public or the crowd by promotion through online forums, social media, and crowdfunding websites. That's how you get the message out, and that's how you invite folks in to help invest in your company. Equity crowdfunding involves the exchange of relatively small amounts of cash from an investor in return for a proportionate slice of equity in that particular business. And this equity typically gives investors partial ownership in the form of non-voting shares, but can also be offered as preferred shares with dividends. Most of our audience today will benefit most from an equity crowdfunding approach, which is the focus of the conversation. But it's also important to note that crowdfunding as a category, it extends beyond equity crowdfunding to also include debt crowdfunding and donation rewards-based crowdfunding. Equity crowdfunding, like any investment in Canada, is regulated. So let's talk about what those regulations that you need to be aware of. In Canada, the securities industry is provincially regulated, and each province has its own regulatory committee. Here in Ontario, it's done by the OSC, or the Ontario Securities Commission, whose role it is to enforce those regulations, protect the investors, and provide a stability to Ontario's financial ecosystem. When a public company issues securities on a stock exchange, they use a legal document called a prospectus. This prospectus details the investment, the risk, details lots of valuable information for the public as they consider an investment. But private companies have less requirements than the public companies through something called a prospectus exemption, similar to what we're going to talk about with the crowdfunding exemption today. In addition, in addition to other options for diversifying portfolios, investing in the private market offers investors an opportunity to participate in early stage companies that have innovative products but aren't large enough or choose not to become a public entity. Crowdfunding sits within the exempt market, but there's still a few more regulations that we need to understand. Who can operate these crowdfunding platforms? There's two currently distinct types of crowdfunding platforms: registered and exempt. And the main difference here is that the registered platform is operated by an EMD, or an exempt market dealer, and they can provide support to said investors, whereas the exempt portals don't have that option. We'll dive deeper into that with our experts in a little bit, but if crowdfunding is new to you, an EMD-led portal is a much safer bet for you. So now that we've looked at all of that, let's talk about who can invest in crowdfunding. There are typically two types of individuals that can invest, and the first is a retail investor. Retail investors include almost every Canadian, but of course you have to be the age of majority. And as of the new rules issued at the end of September of 2021, you can now invest up to $2,500 in any given company in a given year. And I don't mean calendar year. It's from the time any given crowdfunding offer is closed until the next calendar year. In working with that EMD, or the exempt marketing dealer we spoke about on the last slide, they can let you know if a larger investment opportunity is actually appropriate for you. And the second type of investor is an accredited investor, who generally speaking has more than $1 million in investable assets. Now that we've sorted who can invest, let's look at the requirements that a company has to meet before launching a campaign. The business itself obviously has to be operating in Canada. It can be a corporation or a partnership. You can raise up to a maximum of $1.5 million using equity crowdfunding, though an EMD, again, can discuss other options that go beyond that limit. Typically, you don't need a financial statement to be listed, but of course, it's always going to help because people crave information. You do require that minimum viable product or a demo version of the product or service to be able to showcase what you're doing. You don't necessarily have to be making money at this point, but it is an option. If you are making money, equity crowdfunding is still an option for you. Each of your campaigns can last up to 90 days, and they need to outline a minimum and maximum raise target for investors. And if that minimum isn't reached, funds are typically refunded to the investor, unless, of course, you're already generating revenue. And then that minimum fund requirement can be maintained. And of course, you also have to do a report of exemption distribution and file it with regulators as soon as that round closes. Ongoing, typically you want to have an annual shareholder meeting, which is really required for all corporations anyways, regardless of our discussion around crowdfunding. And of course, it's good business practice to provide quarterly updates to your shareholders so they know what the heck you're doing. So now we've met all of these requirements, but is crowdfunding going to actually work for your company? Let's explore what some of the businesses that equity crowdfunding will work for. Typically, we look at startups and small businesses. With the startup category, we've got a great idea. There's a strong positive impact that's either impacting your local community or something much larger and global. Let's look at an example of making cancer drugs get to market faster, or new technology that is reducing pollution. Then we look at small businesses that also typically will have a strong community focus that are going to create that same positive impact. We look at environment these days, social impact, overall global impact, et cetera, et cetera. So it could be something as simple as a restaurant or a favorite store that's selling, environmentally forward products, et cetera, et cetera. Companies that it may not work for can be tied to the value of that business. It's tied up into a small number of employees. So, if they left, that business isn't necessarily as valuable as it was. The company doesn't, if you're a company that doesn't necessarily have the talent or the capacity to focus on this capital raise, it's probably not for you. You're going to need to be able to dedicate some time to campaigning and promoting this equity crowdfunding campaign so that you can bring investors in. And if you don't have that large network to begin with, or the time to figure it out and evangelize, it's probably not going to work or be successful for you. Another consideration is highly technical B2B businesses can be a bit of a challenge depending on the industry. If they don't have that large network or established community to be able to support the crowdfunding efforts. And while there's exceptions to every rule, let's also look at who can't participate. A public Canadian corporation cannot leverage the startup crowdfunding prospectus exemption in equity crowdfunding. Only a private corporation can do that. An EMD or funding portal must be licensed in the province in which the investor lives in order to allow that investor to participate. So if your platform is not licensed in the province that you are as an investor, you're not going to be able to invest in that particular campaign. International investors also can't participate through the crowdfunding exemption and must run a round with a platform in the country, in that particular country, to allow those investors to be included. So for example, if you wanted to raise from both Canadian and US investors, then you'd need to run 2 separate campaigns, one here in Canada on a Canadian platform, and then one in the US. And unfortunately, currently, there's no platforms that currently are licensed to do both jurisdictions. Again, outliers there, but the general rule is just that. So with all of that, you're ready to jump on the bandwagon, and we're going to showcase what else you're going to need in order to actually launch a campaign. So you're going to need your certificates of incorporation, a capitalization table, your business plan, an overall pitch deck, your financial statements, of course, shareholders agreement, your 5-year financial projections, and why you're raising this amount, and of course what the amount that it is that you're raising. And then there's some special documentation in this form 45-106-F1 that you'll also have to submit along with your offering document. Now, an offering document does encapsulate some of the documents that we just talked about. It, in essence, is that summary of everything a prospective investor might want to know before they're considering an investment with you. And it's required by the regulators for every company using the startup crowdfunding exemption. It again includes your company background, details on the founders, the terms of the deal, who that crowdfunding platform host is, the rights of the shareholder, any risks that can be outlined, the length of the campaign, what that minimum investment is, and what the goals of the campaign are, and of course how you're going to use those funds. This offering document is then signed by the company, which is saying that they're telling the truth about everything that they've shared with you, and it has to be filed within 10 to 30 days of the campaign closing, depending on which platform you're leveraging. So wow, I mean, that was a lot of information, basic information to cover on the ins and outs of crowdfunding, but we are just getting started. So Barry, I'm going to pass it back to you to dive deeper into Crowdfunding 101. Over to you, Barry.
That's fantastic. So thank you, Jen. Trieste, I think we're going to start with you. Would you mind describing Frontfundr and how have the new changes in the crowdfunding rules improved opportunities, both for founders as well as investors?
Absolutely, definitely. Thanks for having me on today, Barry. Super excited to be able to discuss this with Alex and Trung and yourself. So Frontfundr, as you noted, is Canada's first equity crowdfunding platform. There are now more companies who do this, such as Equivesto, who have entered the space. And what we do is really allow Canada's startups and growth stage companies to raise capital from their community of supporters, and everyday Canadians are able to now invest in some of the country's most exciting startups. So really, these investment opportunities previously weren't available to roughly 96% of Canadians. So we're really opening it up and democratizing it to all of Canada to be able to support these opportunities. And if we look at the funding landscape, it can be very difficult for founders to raise capital. If we look at certain more marginalized groups, female founders, founders of color, the funding landscape is not overly supportive of that. Recent stats show that only 2.3% of venture capital funding goes to female entrepreneurs. So platforms like ourselves and Equivesto are really able to support in creating a more equitable environment for founders to raise capital and to do so from their community itself. And I think, Barry, you had asked as well, just kind of about the crowdfunding legislation and how that has changed since September 2021. So what we actually saw is the previous crowdfunding legislation under the exemption 45535 allowed companies to raise $250,000 a year from retail investors across 2 campaigns. And what we saw in that legislation change is that companies could now raise up to $1.5 million over a 12-month period. And that's a significant increase for Canadian entrepreneurs to be able to grow and scale their business and really allow to create a more innovative economy for Canada's most exciting startups. So that's been a fantastic change on the entrepreneurial front. And for retail investors itself, crowdfunding in Canada was previously very fragmented. Each province had their own rules and their own limits as to what investors could invest. So that exemption that came into play in September, 45110, actually created a national harmonized exemption across the country. So that means that now Canadians across Canada are able to invest $2,500 in Canadian startups or up to $10,000 if they're deemed suitable by a dealing representative. So to our point earlier about EMDs and kind of listing portals, an EMD is able to conduct that suitability and allow investors in certain cases, if deemed suitable, to invest up to $10,000 in startups. So it's been really great for creating a more cohesive environment across the country to make it a little bit more easier to understand the legislation as well for everyday Canadians and for founders raising capital. So ultimately creating a more innovative business ecosystem for our startup economy, which is great.
That's fantastic. So thank you. And Alexander, what made you start Equivesto? And do you really see the crowdfunding taking a more prominent role for future efforts when it comes down to funding for founders? And also having a greater role when it comes down to this access to, as Trieste says, an entirely new set of founders and investors?
Entirely. Thank you, Barry. It's great to be here. And I think that's a fantastic question. Creating Equivesto was very much about continuing to provide access. Myself and my co-founder, we founded Equivesto back in 2017, but we were already thinking about creating it and creating a platform like this, even when sort of the first stab at the rules that Trieste mentioned came in 2016. So in 2016 is when Canada first sort of tried to allow it. And really, it was at that time that we said, okay, we want to start getting involved in this. But we knew to do it properly, we had to become an exempt market dealer. And it is a lot of work to become an exempt market dealer. It took us 3.5 years to get the securities license to be able to do that, to really demonstrate to the regulators that we are going to be responsible and make sure, we can protect investors in the private investing landscape and be, a great exempt market dealer. And so it took us a long time to get that license, which is good. We think it's positive that that's a requirement in the space. But for us, it was really about creating more opportunities. It's fantastic that Frontfundr is here. If we look to the US, where equity crowdfunding has been around for a bit longer and is a bit more mature than it is in Canada, there's well over 5, maybe almost 10 platforms at this point, and they're all doing fantastic because the opportunity is so large. And so for us, we saw this as a really sort of paradigm shift in what raising capital can mean for not just Canadian startups, which have that kind of angel and VC pipeline, which as Jennifer mentioned, really doesn't necessarily fit all founders. It's really kind of white guys who went to Stanford who really, do well in that angel VC track, but everyone else of all backgrounds, but also, as you mentioned, Barry, the small businesses, which angels would never talk to. Both categories of businesses and many more should be able to raise capital from their community. The fact that, out of a well-meaning intention, the government essentially said, unless you're rich, you can't invest in these businesses, was there to kind of protect the general public and retail investors from, any potential challenges in their investments. But as a result, it created this sort of two-caste system where you're wealthy enough to be able to invest in these, and that helps you get wealthier, or you're not, and you're not able to participate. So equity crowdfunding, changing that, has really kind of opened the floodgates, as J.S. mentioned, about really allowing all Canadians from all backgrounds to participate. And from our perspective, really share that potential wealth. We look at, how minimum wage has changed or not changed in the last 50 years versus, CEO salaries and corporate profits. It really demonstrates that owning businesses, both public companies and small businesses and startups, is really the way to generate and create that longer term intergenerational wealth. So for us, creating a platform that would allow that for Canadians was really kind of an important way for us to kind of give back to the Canadian community. And then at the same time, from a founder's perspective, your community understands you. They're the people who are using your product, who are supporting everything that you've done before. So not only do you know that you have a group of people who believe in you and would want to support something that you're doing, but at the same time, by allowing your community to invest, you're giving them an opportunity to actually increase their own wealth and their own situation as the company grows. So it's really kind of a win-win-win all around from our perspective.
I love that and absolutely agree. I think one of the many issues in the current ecosystem is we have a situation where a lot of private equity is currently being held very early for much longer by a very small group of individuals, and so that value that is seen as these companies grow isn't being distributed accordingly. And so I think crowdfunding provides an amazing opportunity from an investor standpoint to be able to participate, but also allows the people that are looking for more than just their investment thesis, who truly believe in those businesses. And I think attached to that, raise a really good point. I've had people ask, eQuo, you're planning on having multiple platforms on board. And what I love about whether it's Equivesto, whether it's Frontfundr or others, there's the realization that there is so much opportunity, and you are all very much early in creating this entire opportunity for founders and investors. And so there's a lot of room, because I think everybody's finding their own niche, their own space here. So having said that, Trung, you've actually used a couple of different types of crowdfunding platforms, and you're unique in terms of you've also done this in Canada and the US. Can you walk us through your decision to use crowdfunding as a funding strategy for Rice, and what are the pros and cons that you found? You're on mute.
You're muted, Trung.
There we go. All good? Okay, cool. So first of all, thanks for having me. So we actually started off with raising in the US before launching an OM in Canada. And our exemption is a little different from the traditional equity crowdfunding exemptions in Canada. Because we started in the US, we're allowed to raise a much larger round, up to 75 million every 12 months through a instrument known as Regulation A+. The requirements are a lot more strict. You do have to get audited financials and have to be public. They call this a mini IPO. And then we take that Regulation A+ filing that is qualified by the SEC, and we do an OM wrapper, an offering memorandum wrapper in Canada, and that allows us to raise also significantly more in Canada. So this is how we got around from raising from both Canadian and US investors. One of the main reasons why we did this was because over 90% of our customers are actually based in the US. So we didn't want to preclude them from being able to invest in our round. And at the end of the day, we are Canadian, so we do want to tap into that Canadian audience as well. One of the reasons why we chose to do equity crowdfunding is because we are a consumer company. And as you mentioned, Barry and Trias and the rest, equity crowdfunding and retail investors, they work better with consumer products or a consumer brand that that investors know about. Think of the Teslas, the Ubers, anything like that. If you're a consumer, you're likely going to know it. You're likely going to invest in more versus like a B2B company, as mentioned. So the idea with equity crowdfunding is that you're really funneling your community or your customers to becoming investors, and vice versa. If you acquire investors, they could become your customers. So it's a whole viral effect. It allows you to raise increments, small increments of cash from hundreds and hundreds and thousands of investors. And it just opens up the mobilization of capital from anyone and anywhere. So that's why I really like the idea of equity crowdfunding. And if you think about it, 10 years ago, there was never a post-seed round, a pre-seed round, and seed extension, all that. Now you have all these funds that focus strictly on pre-seed, seed, post-seed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A couple of years ago, Kickstarter came out, and then you have a product crowdfunding round. I think equity crowdfunding will replace one of those rounds or supplement one of those rounds. And I think WeFundr in the US, coined the perfect term. It's really called the community round, getting your community involved. And that's what I think the direction of capital raising will go towards.
That's fantastic. Thanks. And I fully agree with you. We're a big proponent of crowdfunding. And in fact, one of the things that we've basically been focused on is how can we augment and create more options. And crowdfunding, I think at almost every level is going to be transformative when it comes down to the ecosystem. So with that in mind, I'd like to see what can founders do if they want to improve their chances for successful crowdfunding the campaign. And why is it so important to ensure that you have access to an EMD throughout the process? I'm going to start with Trieste, then Alexander, and then Trung. I'd love for you to finish with some of your experiences as a founder.
Absolutely. Thanks so much there, Barry. I know Trung highlighted the fact that equity crowdfunding really is a great option for CPG companies or B2C companies. It may not as naturally lend itself to B2B companies, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're excluded from the opportunity. It just means the business has to work to set itself up for success in that form of funding. And one of the biggest things, and what we've all kind of touched on as a group, is that this form of funding really comes down to community. Having a community, building that community, growing that community. And in fact, one of our past funders who raised on the platform, Kara Sam, she's the CEO of Butcher Brew. She's done a few rounds on Frontfundr. She wrote a great thought piece on LinkedIn calling it community raising, because ultimately that's what equity crowdfunding is. You're raising from your community. So as a business, it's really important ahead of time to think, who is involved in your community, who's going to want to participate. That can be your existing customer base. It can be people who subscribe to your newsletter and are following along the business's progress. It can be your followers on Instagram, on LinkedIn. It can be your personal network of people. And really identifying and nurturing that community is one of the best ways to set yourself up for success. And if you are that more B2B focused business where you don't necessarily have a big social following, what's really important at that stage is to activate your professional networks. A lot of people within the company are well connected, they've got contacts, and we find actually LinkedIn can be a great tool for promoting those types of businesses within their campaigns. But setting yourself up for success and looking through this raise through the lens of community is very important. And with that, it really comes down to now executing a very strong marketing campaign to identify that community, reach out to that community, and convert that community. So ultimately, one of the benefits of equity crowdfunding is that it really is a marketing exercise for a company at the same time. So you really need to have the capacity within your team to be able to execute a fully integrated marketing campaign via email marketing, social media, press, all those various strategies that we can think about to put together an integrated campaign. And I know Alex and I have touched on this a bit. Sometimes these companies will actually need external support to help with that as well. And they might bring in an agency to support them with the campaign if they don't have the capacity to bring that on themselves. But that's really a very critical aspect to this form of funding. And as a benefit to businesses, we've actually seen in particular with our CPG companies that while they're raising capital through equity crowdfunding, their revenue increases because their investors are becoming customers in the business and their customers are becoming investors. So it's actually a great potential benefit to businesses as well to not only raise capital, but also grow their business revenue at the same time, which is nice to see. One of the other elements I would say just to set yourself up for success with this form of campaign is to really have respect for all your investors. a lot of companies may naturally want to prioritize the larger investors and give them a greater time commitment and really support them through the process more. But in this form of funding, you really need to value every investor who comes through the door, even that individual who's only contributing $250 for your business. They're now sharing in this journey with you. They're becoming a co-owner. You know, they're on this mission with you, and so being able to communicate with everyone, dedicate the time to answer those investor questions throughout the course of the campaign, and really setting yourself up as a business to be able to, you know, transparently share information with now all of your small shareholders, even after the raise, is incredibly important. So I know there's so many things we can get into on this, but I'll leave it there. I'm sure Alex and Trung have some great insights to share as well.
Well, I fully agree with you, especially on treating everybody the same. As you know, when we set out with our Invest Small campaign, Frontfundr, we only asked Canadians to invest $250. And we treated them exactly the same way as if they'd invested $2,500, $25,000 or more. And one tip that I would throw out is, as people indicate their interest in investing, reach out to them directly and just ask any questions. Not everybody who says they're going to invest will, and being able to create those personal connections is pretty critical. Alex, what else would you add?
Yeah, well, you've both covered a lot of the high level great points. I think, you know, one thing that a lot of people think about when they come to do a campaign is, okay, I need to get the campaign up and running as quickly as possible. How long will it take to do the due diligence? How long will it take to do the paperwork? How quickly can I launch this thing? I need the money yesterday. With equity crowdfunding, as you know, everyone has well highlighted, community is a critical piece of this. And so oftentimes with companies that, you know, we work with, we'll encourage them to spend some time doing some brand building or community activation before doing a campaign. And then even leading up to a campaign launch, doing some pre-campaign marketing can also be a really strong strategy to build a wait list. Really sort of my top tip for success is, if you have a total target raise, let's say you want to raise $1 million, you want to try to make sure that you've gathered at least 1/3 of that on a wait list before launching your campaign. So rather than saying, what's the quickest I can get to, you know, launch on day one kind of thing, you want to think maybe a little bit more about how can I, you know, continue to grow my community organically, not necessarily with paid content, but how can I continue to create value to my community members, build this network, help them feel connected to my business, and then introduce them to the idea that we may raise in the future and see their interest. And doing this exercise can even help you understand whether equity crowdfunding is the right fit for you, rather than, you know, as much as I'd love everybody to hire Equivesto and pay us all kinds of fees, it's maybe easier to sort of do a little bit like this and start seeing the engagement you're getting from your community, so you know whether you even want to try going down a path like this, or maybe it's a bit of a larger undertaking than you're expecting.
Absolutely, and I like some of the conversation about this. Really is about community, and it's community building. And when you think about it, not just as fundraising, you know, very binary, very cold, you're really establishing trust that's going to affect future sales. It's going to affect future relationships, and ideally, you know, these investors are going to continue as later rounds happen. So Trung, you are in, again, a very unique position of having gone through. What strategies, what tips would you give to help ensure a much more successful crowd campaign? Oh, Trung?
It looks like Trung is frozen at the moment.
Oh, he's
There he
reconnected.
is.
Here we go.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, Trung. So we're just asking, you're in a unique position, having completed and have worked also in an existing crowd raise. What are your tips in terms of being more successful? What have you learned, and where have you made some mistakes that maybe you can let us know that we can prevent others from going down those paths?
So I think consumer brands that have experience with e-commerce will have slightly a better understanding and job with equity crowdfunding. And the reason I say that is because, as the other panelists mentioned, it's a lot of online marketing and campaigns. That's what the exemptions and the laws allow you to do. You're allowed to market the raise online on Facebook, Instagram, social media, whatnot. So I think, again, as the panelists mentioned, you should really build that whole pipeline of potential investors. And that could be as simple as emailing all your past customers and saying, hey, we're planning to do this. Are you interested in investing? If so, how much? And when you do launch a round, not all of them will convert, but it will give you a good indication of how much potential funding you could get before you invest a lot of time, money, and effort on building the campaign. Really nailing down the messaging on your campaign matters. Having great images is may not convert, but having something that is both web and mobile friendly will matter. If somebody's looking on your phone, and this is very technical, but it really does matter. But if you have a nice image on web, but on your phone, nobody can see it, they might miss a crucial piece of information. So really building that pipeline, really focusing on that campaign, planning everything ahead of time. And one thing I do want to highlight and indicate is that it is an opportunity cost. You're either going to go the traditional VC fundraising route and spend all your time and effort there, or you're going to do an equity crowdfunding raise. It's hard to do both. You're making an opportunity cost, you're making a decision to one or the other, and they both have pros and cons. And the other thing I want to highlight is that a lot of entrepreneurs I speak to think that going the VC route is easier. You're talking to a few investors, they're going to put a big check in and more cost effective, but at the end of the day, it's actually not. When you do your Series A raise, most VCs will require audited statements. So when I did my Reg A, it's going to be the same. And a lot of VCs will back end the legal fees for the due diligence out of the funding. And that could be $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, the same cost that you might spend on an equity crowdfunding raise. So it just really depends on your strategy there. Just a tip I wanted to highlight. Other kind of learning lessons and tips I went through was really honing down on the process to capture those investors, get them in the funnel, and really update them. Investors are not going to invest right away. They're going to do their diligence. It might take 6 to 8 touch points before they invest. So keeping them up to date on the company progress, very important. Either do that through the portal or through direct emails. And what you'll kind of notice, and the other panelists will mention this, is towards the end of the campaign is when you'll likely see a lot of the investments. That whole FOMO, 3 days left to invest, gets, I would say, the bulk of the investments, to be honest. But that's kind of the high level overview and tips I could provide.
Well, that's fantastic. So I know you need to leave a bit early, Trung. So I'm going to let you lead with this next question as well. Crowdfunding isn't useful without the crowd, and you talked about investors and how to manage them. Why should retail and accredited investors participate in crowdfunding? How should they be expected to conduct their due diligence, or what can the expectations be on due diligence? And what are the benefits? So we'll start with Trung, and then we'll go to Trieste and Alex.
So I think a community like Frontfundr, where I had my first Canadian raise, it does provide a sense of trust for a lot of new investors and new angels or retail investors that invest in startups. Obviously, for the investors, they're trying to discover the next Uber or Airbnb to invest in, where they could potentially get an outsized return. So that's the benefit for the investors. In terms of diligence, a lot of the diligence is already done by the portal to vet them. They don't accept every single company that applies to a portal. Just remember that when you invest in either a Canadian offering or a US offering, the portals will do their due diligence, kind of weed out the bad apples. But at the end of the day, the investor has to do their own due diligence as well. There's only so much that the company in the portal could do to prevent them. But and that's why the regulations are there. That's why you can only invest $2,500 in each new startup, because they're trying to limit the risk for the investors. Now, if you're accredited, obviously there's an unlimited amount of capital you can invest. But at the end of the day, the investor is required to do their own due diligence. There's no liability on the portal or the company at the end of the day.
Perfect. Trieste, what are your thoughts when it comes down to investors, whether retail or accredited?
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely think really, particularly on the retail side, what a lot of investors are looking for nowadays is to invest with their values, to find, a company that aligns with perhaps their, social values that they have. We're seeing a big shift towards, ESG investment opportunities and things like that. So I think that's really a big draw, and connecting with a company that you're passionate about. I will say as well, for investors, I know Alex touched on kind of wealth creation opportunities. Like for those who really do research and follow those, wealthy, successful investors in the space, it generally is because they were able to get into these private company investment opportunities at a very early stage. So this really levels the playing field and gives investors that opportunity. And I like to say as well, you kind of get to be your own dragon or your own shark, where you're having these businesses, you read their pitches and you get to make a decision from there. And actually that was kind of my own experience in finding Frontfundr. I actually came to Frontfundr as an investor. I was looking for investment opportunities. I had actually found Cedars, one of the large platforms in the UK, while I was studying in Europe. And in coming back to Canada, I was trying to do my own research. How can I invest in startups? I think this is so exciting. And that's where I came across Frontfundr. And I found a company at the time, the Very Good Butchers. They were local to Vancouver Island. They were in the plant-based meat space. And I could see how big of a market this could become. And it was very relatable, as people in my family had a lot of dietary restrictions. So I was like, I get this business. I like this business. I'm going to see if I can invest. And so I did. And I think in doing that, investors, really need to conduct their own due diligence, as we talked about, review the offering materials, watch the video, read the campaign overview, go through the pitch deck, the offering document, ask the company questions if you're unsure about certain things. There are a lot of opportunities to really do that research that you want to do on your own. Also, see who their competitors are, see how they're positioned. For myself as well, I always really like to look at the brand. How does the brand come across? Is it durable? How is it positioned? How are people engaging with it? And that to me is a bit of an indicator as to how I think the company is going to perform moving forward. So I certainly think it's a great opportunity there. And for accredited investors, I think what's nice is it's kind of a central platform where there's a lot of opportunities available that they can kind of look through. But ultimately, I think, nowadays it's not just about the financial return of an opportunity. It's also about how does this align with my values and how does this fit with my own investment philosophy?
This is fantastic. Alex, why don't you maybe round this out? And then we've got a few questions from the audience that we're going to jump into.
Perfect. Before I do, I know you have to run, Trung, so I just want to say thank you for joining the panel. If you need to hop off, it's been great hearing your experiences.
Thanks. I'll be hopping off in 3 minutes. I just answered that last Q&A question. My take is, the question was, if I have $50,000 to invest, should I invest in one company or multiple? My take with any kind of asset class is you want to diversify. So take a portfolio approach. That's what VCs do. If you have 50,000, you might want to invest in 5 to 10 companies and kind of diversify that risk. So just wanted to end off with that. Any questions, you can reach me. I left my website there and my contact information is there. So send me a message. I'll be happy to answer any questions about equity crowdfunding or even our current offering. Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Trung.
Trung.
Take care. Bye.
To go back to your question, Barry, around sort of looking at investments and how to determine sort of the right investment for you, I think Tres really summarized it well about sort of investing in businesses that you feel comfortable with and that align with your values is really important. Another thing that I would highlight is the critical role that the platform does play. There's a legal requirement for platforms that are EMDs to do something called KYP, know your product. And each platform is going to do it a little bit differently, but part of that whole process is really a core due diligence piece, as what I call the boring due diligence. So due diligence is really looking at a company, trying to understand everything about it and decide whether that's a good investment for you. And I like to split that into two categories, the fun due diligence and the boring due diligence. The fun due diligence is, do I like the space the company's in? Do I think they're going to make money? What are their competitors looking like? Does it align with my values? That sort of stuff, which the platform doesn't do for you. We provide the information, we make it available for you, but that you're going to do yourself. The boring due diligence, which the platform does do, is actually look in from a very technical and legal perspective at the company. Does this company actually legally exist? Are they saying things that are true? Do they have the right corporate structure to take investors? Is all the sort of, are the shares I'm buying real? All this sort of stuff, that's all being done by the platform. And one important thing is whether you're an accredited investor or a retail investor, a lot of investors don't have the time or understanding to do sophisticated, technical, boring due diligence. And so using a platform, whether it's a retail investor or as accredited, you come in knowing a big piece of that has already been taken care of by the platform. So that makes it a lot easier for you. One benefit as well, whether as a retail investor or an accredited investor, if you're investing directly into a company as an accredited investor, the sort of traditional way, you're looking at the pitch deck, you're asking, to access their data. They're not preparing a list of risks of investing into themselves. The company's not doing that. But if a company is actually doing an equity crowdfunding campaign, they're legally mandated to prepare that document that Jennifer mentioned called the offering document. And that will be attached to every campaign page, whether it's on Equivesto or Frontfundr or wherever. Inside that document, also that document is exceptionally important, so I recommend every investor read it. But inside that document is a section of risks. And whether you're a retail investor or an accredited investor, reading through this section will highlight some of the risks associated with investing. And even though you've thought about the company and you've probably thought about a lot of the risks of investing, there might be some in there that you never thought about before. And reviewing that section will help you kind of remind yourself or realize some of these things that you might not have thought about on your own, and can even help you improve your own due diligence skill set. So that's something that I think is highly valuable.
That's great. I want to open this up to some Q&A. So we're going to maybe just do one person answers for some of these, unless somebody has something that they really would like to add. So Scott Hutchins had asked, how are the crowdfunding platforms responding to the announcement by FinTrack that they need to register as MSBs? And are they notifying those using them that they are? I think that one, I'm going to let both of you answer.
Okay, I'm very excited to answer that. So any platform that's operated by an exempt market dealer is actually already fully regulated by a FinTrack. So we have no additional requirements because we are already doing the same level of reporting requirements that any other financial institution, including a bank, would be doing. This change only applies to that exempt funding portal category that we talked about, which, to be honest, I would recommend not using anyways. But as a fully licensed exempt market dealer, we're already we've been doing that since day one. So there's no change.
Sure. And I don't have too much to add on top of what Alex already said. He covered it very well. All of the exempt market dealers as platforms are all very regulated, have been since the start. That's been something that's very important to us, certainly helps with trust and transparency with investors as well. And to his point there about kind of the funding portals or listing portals, there's certainly a different level of due diligence. There really is none on the companies that are performed. So it certainly is something that investors have to be aware of, kind of different requirements from the two. And certainly having that stamp of kind of recognition from an EMD portal when you're evaluating those investment opportunities can add that layer of trust and credibility that you have, and give you a bit more comfort in evaluating those opportunities yourself.
That's great. Now, I'm going to actually combine, in the interest of time, some questions from Melissa as well as Angie. So the questions are, if someone were to do a crowdfunding option, how do you know how much to ask for? How do you figure out how much you're going to give up? So in other words, how are you valuing your company? And who decides the length of the campaign when you do run? And then lastly, can the platform limit the length of the campaign? So who would like to jump in there first?
I can take that, or Trish, you can take it.
Sure, Alex, you go for it. I'll follow.
Okay, perfect. I'll try to run through them pretty quickly. So how much do you know how much to ask for, and how much do you give up? So how much you ask for is really dependent on what your financial need is for a business. So you need to first look at yourself and say, what do I want to do? What is doing those things cost, and sort of figure that out. The second piece is, how much of my company am I giving up? So really it's very simple math. It's what is the value of your company versus what is the amount of money you need. It's a straight ratio, one divided by the other. That's the percentage of the company that you're going to be giving up as part of this raise. Then the question is, how do I determine my valuation? That's something that we as a platform can actually help with. We've taught places like CPA Ontario and others how to value early stage companies. And so we can sort of help you through that whole process and guide you around setting your valuation. The valuation choice is always something set by the company. We do not force a valuation. We are here to sort of guide and support that whole process. And I'm sure Frontfundr does something similar. In terms of the length of the campaign and, how does the platform sort of control that length? So the maximum length of a campaign is actually set by the government. That's that 90-day maximum campaign length. You can choose to have a campaign shorter than that. That's up to you. And you can talk to the platform about recommendations around campaign length for you. The longer the campaign is, the more opportunity you have to get investors in, but also the more time you have to spend sort of being very type A and being out there with the marketing and everything like that. So that's a decision that you need to sort of think about, and the platform can sort of help you make that decision. Did I miss any part of that question, Barry?
No, I think you got that quite well, Trieste. Any additional thoughts to this?
Sure, I'll follow up on that a little bit. I know we typically kind of see two groups of companies who will come to us, some that already have an offering in place where they're actively raising on. So the question of how much to give away doesn't really come up. They've already established what that's going to be. And others that need a little bit more guidance to actually help them say, okay, what is the round going to look like? How much are we going to give away? What's the security type going to be? And that's really one of the benefits of working with an EMD is that, we're able to work with you through that on due diligence and provide the guidance that you need to say, if you're looking to give away this much equity in this round, if you're to do a subsequent round, you're going to over dilute yourself as a founder, and we don't want to see you do that. So we'll be able to provide some guidance for them on that. And in terms of the valuation, we do sometimes see companies that come to us and their valuation does seem a little high, given where the business is at. And in that case, we don't turn them away because of that. But what we'll often say is go out and find a lead investor to validate that valuation, and then we'll be able to start raising on the platform. So we definitely work with companies on that as well. And yeah, to the question about campaign length, Alex answered that very well. It's up to a maximum of 90 days. You need to conduct a close at that time. We do have companies who will run shorter campaigns, 45, 60 days, depending on what they're looking to raise, what level of community they have, if they really think they can hit that goal. And sometimes we'll see that companies need to actually do multiple rounds where, they'll do a 90-day campaign, conduct a close, then they'll do another 90-day campaign, conduct a close, because perhaps they have a larger fundraising goal and they know that it's going to need to take a bit more time. And the benefit of the new crowdfunding regulation with 45-110 is that you can keep raising over that rolling 12-month period. So you could actually kind of have 4 90-day campaigns throughout the course of a year to keep raising that capital. Now, we don't recommend that for all businesses because it is so time intensive to raise capital, and we don't want investors to sometimes, get a little saturated with the messaging about the campaign, but it certainly is an available option. And we do see companies that are able to leverage that successfully as well. And again, one of the benefits of, working with a portal is that, or a platform, we're able to provide that guidance for you as we go and, provide recommendations that we think make sense given, the state of the business, what its goals are, and things such as that.
It's great. Thanks, Trieste. One things that I'd add into that, I think we've taken a slightly unique approach in terms of we really tried to go for small investors because we were very much focused on proving that small investors mattered and that you could be successful. Having said that, as we started to build towards Go Small Canada to build momentum in that, one of the things that I wish I would have done in hindsight was actually created a pause in between campaigns. So thinking through the campaign strategy and adding pauses and being strategic is something that you may want to consider. I'm very happy with what we've been able to achieve, but also recognizing this is so new, figuring out the right strategy for your business and overall best practices is very much in motion right now. We're just at the end of the hour, so I do want to thank everybody for attending. I would like to give a quick shout out to not only Jen for the fantastic presentation at the front end of this. But I'd like to give the opportunity for Trieste and Alexander just to give a quick shout out about your platforms, and it would encourage everybody out there, if you're looking at crowdfunding, to reach out to them directly. So maybe Alex, do you want to talk about Equivesto, and then Trieste, you can finish the webinar off with Frontfundr.
Thanks, Barry.
Certainly. I know that there was one question that was asked by a lady named Judy that we didn't get time. I'll just answer it very, very quickly. She wanted to raise capital for a nonprofit. I would say in that situation, you'd want to consider donation-based crowdfunding, not equity crowdfunding. Equity crowdfunding is about offering ownership of a business to investors who are expecting a return. So if you're operating a nonprofit business, there wouldn't be returns from that business. So I would look at something like GoFundMe or Indiegogo or something like that to crowdfund a nonprofit. But in terms of Equivesto, Equivesto is a Canadian equity crowdfunding platform and investment portal, fully licensed exempt market dealer, as we've all talked about on this call. We're really focused on helping small businesses, startups, also private funds and private real estate opportunities become available investments to the general public. So if you're looking to raise capital for your business or get into investing, you can sign up on Equivesto. We also have a very detailed learning center with hundreds of hours of information for both companies and investors if you want to learn more. And for an investor, as with all equity crowdfunding platforms in Canada, there are no fees. So you can sign up on Equivesto. You can also sign up on Frontfundr, get even more deal exposure. There's lots of space to play. So sign up on both and see what's there.
Absolutely. Thanks for the shout out there, Alex. Definitely agree. It's a great opportunity to be able to evaluate a number of companies across both platforms. Certainly for Frontfundr, we've been around for quite a few years now. We've really been aiming to grow our marketplace of investment opportunities that we have available and build more of our investment community. And right now we've got 16 opportunities live on the Frontfundr site that you can look to invest. That includes, CPG companies, female-founded companies, more impact-focused, as well as, real estate funds. If you're looking for more of an income-generating investment, we've got those available as well. And on the company side, we really like to say, we're a complement across the funding lifecycle that a company is looking to do. It doesn't just have to be an early stage round. It can be a portion of your Series A. It can be a pre kind of private round before you're looking to go public in some capacity. So equity crowdfunding can really be a great complement for a business, no matter where they are in their funding journey. And that's something that you can certainly come to discuss with us at any time. We certainly love working with, Canada's startup ecosystem. It's so exciting to see all of these businesses. And for investment opportunities, it's a great opportunity to not only invest in businesses that you might be passionate about or already know or already be customers of, but to discover some new exciting opportunities as well. So to Alex's point, definitely encourage you guys to get signed up on both platforms. It's free to register. It's free to invest for you. And it's a great opportunity to get some exposure to this type of investing.
That's great. I'd like to thank everybody. One of the key goals that we have at eQuo is it's not just about transactions and being able to connect people with funding. It's about really understanding, it's educating, and it's supporting one another. We are a community, and as a community, we can all support one another. I've always loved that adage: a rising tide raises all ships. And this is really at the heart of what we're trying to do, is to create real support and real success across the board. So thank you. With that in mind, we're planning for September a few more additional webinars. One is going to be how to prepare for commercial banking. And one is going to be on understanding from an Indigenous standpoint, trade as well as procurement opportunities. So we'll notify everybody, and please, we hope that you'll attend those as well. In the meantime, have a great weekend, everybody. And thank you very, very much.
Thanks so much for bringing us all together, Barry. Appreciate it.
Very
Thanks,
well.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.